So my name is Grant Gilchrist. I'm working as an engineering consultant for Tesco Automation, and my job is basically to help utilities understand what they need to do to move into the next century. We've had electrical power for about 100 years now, and some people would say things have not changed an awful lot since Edison's time. So my job is basically to take computers and communications and standards and help utilities to apply them to what they need to do in order to keep the lights on. And that's getting a lot more challenging because if you take a look at the things that are getting to be very important and big in our society now, we're starting to talk about electric vehicles, we're starting to talk about renewable energy, starting to talk about alternate sources of power, and people getting more control over how they get energy and how they use energy. All of those things can't be done in Edison's network. We have to move ahead. By Edison, I mean Thomas Edison's network, because some companies are called Edison. But those can't be done in the power system of 100 years ago, which it hasn't changed very much until about the last 5 years. And so whether you call it the smart grid or grid modernization or whatever, that's more or less what I'm about. I've been doing 6150 courses for, 10 years now. And it's kind of interesting seeing how the response to them has changed over the years. So I'm very encouraged by that. Okay, so the great thing about 6150 is that it has the potential to reduce costs for a utility in an area where they've never been able to reduce costs before. Right now, if you take a look at it, configuring a substation, getting it set up, installed and configured could take you, 6 weeks to 2 months, depending on the size of the substation. The nice thing about 6150 is if you have all the tools in place and you have the processes in place, you can reduce that. We actually ran some numbers once and ended up to about 25% of that. So there's some real cost savings for a utility there. Also flexibility. As I said, with the smart grid or grid modernization, what you run into is having to make a lot of changes in utilities. Utilities are used to buying things, installing them, and letting them sit for 20 years. Unfortunately, with the changes that are coming these days, that's not likely going to happen anymore. You have to be able to change applications, you have to be able to add new features and delete new features, and that's where the strength of 62850 comes. And we're starting to see now tool sets coming from vendors that are saying, yeah, we're going to start taking advantage of some of these features that are in 62850. And we saw a few of them this week, and I was quite pleased with that. I would recommend any training in 62850 because we need to get the word out. But certainly what I like about this particular course is the mixture of hands-on work and academic. I've done lots of courses where I've just presented the information to people, and people's eyes tend to kind of glaze over after a while. And it's really nice having a setup where people actually get their hands on real devices that are used within their particular utility and start to actually see how this stuff will actually affect them. And I think that's the real strength of this course. We were doing these things. We were doing the 62850 courses where, it was just a presentation. And I've done them a lot. And it's great. And people come away saying, yeah, we should try some of this stuff. But there's no substitute for getting your hands dirty and actually seeing, that's what it really looks like. The most interesting thing I saw today was a real disconnect between what some of the standards drafters, how they saw 6150 being used, and the way that the utility people were actually talking about using it. And since I'm on the standards groups, on the standards bodies, that's something I would take back to them and say, look, this is how you thought these features worked, but in practice, you're probably not going to get anybody to do it that way. So since the beginning of my career, which is like getting towards 30 years now, I've been interested in and working with standards. And a lot of people don't like standards because it means, oh no, I have to do something that I wouldn't have normally done otherwise. But I think a lot of vendors and a lot of utilities don't understand the value of standards. For a utility, the nice thing about a standard like 62850 is that you can point to it and say, I want that, and you don't get vendor lock-in. You're not locked into that particular vendor's technology. You don't end up with those additional costs. The other thing that you get on the vendor side, and the vendors are often the ones who don't like the idea of standards. But what they don't realize is the nice thing about standards is it means you now have access to your competitors' customers, because now their customers can be your customers because there's a standard there. And that means your market expands and everybody's market expands. And so this is a very useful and powerful thing for the industry. And we've kind of seen support for standards come and go. And I hope that we're starting to see a rise again in this, saying, yeah, we really do want standards here because we really don't want to be locked in. And we really do want vendors to have their market expanded. So I started originally with Bell Northern Research, which was the research arm of Nortel. And that's where I got into data communications and started looking at communications in general. After about 5 years there, I got involved with what eventually became a piece of General Electric. It started with Westronic and then Harris and GE Harris, but it was all doing substation automation and software development and protocol development for them. And so that got me involved in standards organizations. And so that led me to DMP3, where I was secretary of the technical committee there for 7 years, and to 62850, where I was helping with the development of edition 1 there. And so standards, DMP, I'm still with them every day, every week anyway. And still a lot of work with 62850 and other standards in the industry. And but I also picked up some other things. So from GE, I went to a consulting firm and ended up doing a lot of stuff with advanced metering. Did some things with Southern California Edison, with BC Hydro, with the state of Illinois when they were trying to do their smart grid plan for the next however many years. And basically picked up a new way of doing things, which was called use cases. It was new then, not so much now, but for developing requirements for utilities. This was a big thing. Use cases, developing requirements. Usually what happens is you get a bunch of people in a room together and you say, how should this thing work? And, you know, the noisy ones put up their hands and the quiet ones don't. And what you get is a list of stuff that you really don't know whether it is any good or not. And you end up with software or hardware that ends up exactly the way that sounds. So the nice thing about use cases is they're telling stories. People like to tell stories. And so with use cases, you get them to tell stories about how they do their job and how they want their job to be. And as you go through that step by step, what you end up with is a set of requirements that you know started with a goal, ended with that goal being met, and you covered all the bases in between. And we found this has been useful in dozens of utilities in putting together big projects, so you don't end up with some of these boondoggles where, well, we spent millions and millions of dollars and nothing happened. Instead, you get the requirements right the first time. So yeah, I'm a Saskatchewan boy. I grew up in Swift Current, went to U of R, took my degree there, and so, you know, land of living skies. That's me. You know, I lived in Calgary for a long time, but because, you know, you like to look at the mountains, but I always like to be able to look east and see the flat too, and so I'm really excited about coming back and being able to. You know, kind of give back to the community that I started with, and also, you know, get to know some family better and spend more time with them, and quite happy with that. Yeah, cybersecurity is something else that I've been involved with, and it's one of the real areas of concern for power utilities these days. If anybody's ever heard of something called Stuxnet, which ended up being used in Iran against their nuclear program there. What a lot of people don't know is that attack that was launched on them basically was a proving ground for technologies that could be used in the power industry. There was also a big attack in the Ukraine not very long ago. And there was some new stuff this week about that. They called it, crash override. Anyway, so people in the power industry have known for a while that this is coming. And obviously, they're already put up defenses. But every once in a while, you'll see another article about how, we're not really ready for the threat that's coming, and that may be true. And so the trick is to try to be one step ahead. And fortunately, I've been involved with development of some standards that will help improve security in the power industry, and was the author of one. And so I'm very pleased to be part of that, and trying to get one step ahead of what we hope will not be a catastrophe. At the moment, most of the ways that people get into the power industry, they would have to get through the main firewalls of the utilities and their defenses. And so that's good news. The biggest problem is that as computers and communications go farther out into the field, what happens is they become more exposed. And it's harder for the IT people and so on to protect the field devices from hacking. Okay, the more devices you hook up to an IP network or to a wireless network, the more defenses you have to put in place. And part of the problem is that those networks are typically not maintained by their IT people. They're typically maintained by what they call operations technology people. There used to be these two worlds in the power industry. There was operations technology and information technology people, and there the twain shall meet. The problem is we get the advantages when we move computers and communications into the operational area. We get a lot of advantages, but we also get security risks. And so what you need is people who can understand both IT and OT and security and be able to talk each other's language to each other in order to make that happen. So it's a big challenge. And, the people on both sides, it's one of these classic rifts. They sometimes they don't want to know about each other and how the other person's job works. So it's good to be a facilitator in between.